One of the most common comments I see pop up on my channel is something to the effect of, guitar players these days are so lucky. It's a sentiment I totally agree with, but I wanted to give you some context because statistically, half of you have always had an abundance of options that came to you via the internet. For us millennial boomers, that was not the case. Guitar really varied by region and your access to your local guitar shop. Half of the time, those guitar shops didn't really carry a wide variety of options unless you were just really lucky and they were ran by someone who had good taste. Shout out to River City Music and 𝐒𝐏𝐄𝐂𝐈𝐀𝐋 in Vancouver, Washington. Now as guitar players, we can literally hop online and buy whatever guitar thing that is cheap just to have a new toy to tinker with on the weekend. And it will most likely sound infinitely superior to the thing I would drool over in a guitar world that my local music store didn't carry back in the 90s or the early 2000s. I mean, I can't emphasize this enough. Guitar players now are so lucky. What's up everybody, welcome to the channel. My name is Taylor, and to illustrate this point, I thought I would get out these relics of forgotten guitar tones to show you what we were dealing with before the internet became a thing you were just always connected to without kicking your mom off the line while you were trying to connect to AOL via dial-up. Remember dial-up?
You've got mail.
And normally right here I would do an ad spot with some cheesy music, but I'm just gonna give it to you straight. This video is brought to you by 𝐕weeTwater and 𝗏𝐿𝐿𝐿. I bought all these multi-effects units, and two of them definitely didn't come with their original power supplies, which is fine because we have a 𝗏𝐿𝐿𝐿 power supply. I've been using this for everything lately, and I reached out to the wonderful people at 𝐕weeTwater to see if I could get a second unit so I didn't have to transport the one I have between home and the office, and they suggested that I try out the DC7 with the 𝗏𝐿𝐿𝐿 attachment. Now this is really cool because not only do you get all the features of the 𝗏𝐿𝐿 stuff like ultra low noise multi-stage filtering, the slim profile, 7 clean isolated power lines that you can adjust between 9 and 18 volts, but the DC7 also has a 24 volt output that you can attach the 𝗏𝐿𝐿𝐿 crux to for powering things like the Quad Cortex or the �ＨX Stump. This can be done with the normal outputs on the DC7, but you have to sum multiple outputs together, which limits the amount of devices that you can connect. With the 𝗏𝐿𝐿𝐿, you can connect these devices to the 24 volt outlet, and it will deliver 9 to 12 volts with a total power of 24 watts. It has overload and short protection, the same slim and sleek profile as the other 𝗏𝐿𝐿𝐿 units, and the same 5-year warranty. Look, if you're a pedalboard enthusiast, I think these power supplies are awesome. I wouldn't hesitate to recommend these to anybody. And you don't have to take my word for it, just look at the reviews. They're always really high scoring. So thank you to 𝐕weeTwater and 𝗏𝐿𝐿𝐿 for sponsoring this video. If you're interested, I will leave a link in the description and the pinned comment. Check them out. They're super sick. All right, so let's plug in these older multi-effects units and we can cringe together as we unpack the sounds of the 90s. What's up guys? Blast from the past here. I'm plugged into this DoD Tech 4X. This is technically the first multi-effects unit that I ever owned. I'm playing my Jackson Soloist with EMGs. It's got an 81 in the bridge, 85 in the neck. That is going into the DoD Tech 4. That is running into this 𝐓𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿 prototype power amp pedal. That is going into this 𝐒𝐿𝐿𝐿 4x12 cabinet. We are powering everything with the 𝗏𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿 that I talked about earlier. Yeah, you remember? Because I definitely don't have the power supply for this old multi-effects unit. The power amp pedal is also being powered by the 𝗏𝐿𝐿𝐿. So there you go. You have a bunch of different features in here. DoD was really popular in the 90s at the time because grunge was really popular, and they had the grunge pedal, so they just kind of like inserted themselves right in there.
That's what she said.
In the movement, you know? I doubt any grunge band ever actually played a grunge pedal. It was probably all marketing.
Oh my God.
But DoD was very popular, so that's why I got one of these. I remember getting this, I think in 2000. I'm not sure exactly when it released. I'll put that on screen right now. But I believe I got mine in 2000, and I figured we would start here because out of the multi-effects units, this is probably the worst out of all of them, just being honest with you. Now, the way you would traditionally run this is into the front of a clean amplifier. However, I found that I actually prefer it going into a power amp and a cabinet versus an actual clean amplifier. It's just like too shrill. It's like too much in the top end when you run it into the front of an actual amplifier, which was my experience with it back in the 90s, running it through my Crate combo amp. But you know, this is a patch that I dialed in. Pretty bad. Now, one of the things that I've noticed with this pedal is you can never really get the clean DI. It always sounds like there's a clean DI blended in, and that's through no fault of mine. It's just the way the pedal works. I'm not exactly sure why. Now, these are technically DoD distortion pedals, not preamps, which is a little bit different from the other units we're gonna go into here in a minute. That was a grunge pedal, this is actually a metal distortion. And then if you go 6 through 10, it just increases the gain. You don't have any controls over the actual pedal, you just cycle through some different presets that they have. We can actually go in here and we can adjust our EQ, but it doesn't really matter too much. You know, this EQ is really, maybe something like that is a little bit better. I don't know how that's translating yet for you guys, but in the room it sounds pretty lame. Pretty flat. But, you know, that's not really where this thing shined. I remember getting this for that purpose, for having like a distortion sound, for being able to start dialing in some metal tones, because I had a couple DoD pedals that I really liked, and I'm like, ooh, this does effects also. Must be really cool. It is. The effects in this are pretty decent, but again, you have the same sort of thing here, where, like, if we turn our mod on, you only have presets for every effect style, so. There's a chorus, we have a flanger, a phaser. Maybe one of the worst phasers ever. A tremolo, ring mod. I actually don't know what this is. A noisemaker. I don't know what that does. A D-tune, very, very 90s. Here's your pitch shifter for everyone that always wants to hear the pitch shifter in each one of these multi-effects units. Quite a bit of latency. Doesn't sound great. Cool, you had it though. I mean, for a teenager in the late 90s, early 2000s, this was a lot of effects. This was a lot of, you know, new possibilities. Back before multi-effects units and amp modelers were so popular and so widely available. Okay, and then we got some auto wah features and stuff. Let's turn the mods off. We have a few different delay types. I'm not gonna go through all these. Just, again, the biggest thing is, like, there's just a limitation. You don't have a lot of control over these effects. Now, you did have 3 presets per bank, and you could switch between banks. Very cool for the time, you know? But by today's standards, very meh. I think the clean tone might actually be one of the best things about this. It is what it is, right? Let's go back to the distorted tone here. We do have one other distortion type in here. Not sure exactly what this is, but it's not very... And you can really hear it with this one. It almost sounds like a distortion layered on top of a DI signal. Okay, so I decided, since my memory serves me correctly, I never liked this thing in front of an amplifier, just to make sure I'm covering all my bases here, because I can just hear it now in the comments like, you didn't plug it into the front of an amplifier, that's the way it's supposed to be. Relax, let's just do that, okay? So this is the amp, this is what it sounds like clean. Let's turn on the DoD Tech 4 X pedal. We still have the thing going on where there's like a DI plus the distortion passing through to the amplifier. It just sounds really weird. Yeah, I know. And like, this is the grunge pedal set. Let's try that metal setting in here. Maybe that's better. The treble is so sensitive. you know, if you're in the camp that you're like, hey, this really needs to go into the front of an amplifier, you might be right in this case. I could see that. It doesn't sound good. This is not like inspiring me. It's not making me motivated to pick up the guitar and play. But, you know, again, like in context, at the time, having a bunch of effects in a small pedal like this was cool. It was pretty novel. But again, just for some context here, let's bypass that thing and then let's listen to the lead channel on this amplifier. I don't even think I can have this thing plugged in like that bypassed. It's producing so much extra noise, dude. I'm gonna have to plug in directly into the amplifier. Now, back when something like the DoD Tech 4 was popular, obviously we had great amplifiers. Like there was the Mesa Boogie dual rectifier, there was the 5150, the JCM 800. You know, there were boost pedals back then. You could achieve a lot of the same great tones that you can achieve today back then, but the options were way, way limited. Especially if you were a guy or a girl or, you know, whatever you are, on a budget. This is like kind of what we had with this crate amplifiers. You know, you had this and a crate. So that's what you got, man. And I think when you see that comment a lot from people like, oh, guitar players now are so lucky. Like, guitar players now really are lucky, even though they're overwhelmed by the options that are out there. And like, you can look for multi-effects units all day long and go down a rabbit hole on them. That is in stark contrast to what the options were in the late 90s, early 2000s, when you would walk into a guitar store and you'd say, I have $100 or whatever it was, and look around and then it's like, oh, this is what's in my budget. I could buy this. You know, that's what you got. We're gonna move on to the next thing here, which is a 𝐬𝐿 something or other. Let's do that. Okay, this is the 𝐬𝐿 G1. I'm not as familiar with this, but in the early days of my channel, I got a lot of requests to like go back and revisit some of these older 𝐬𝐿 products, so that's why I bought this. But you do have a lot more control and versatility than you have with the DoD things. Now, you do have an actual preamp sound, but I believe the preamp actually has the cabinet built into it. You know, the EQ curve of a cabinet built into it, because when you turn it on, not really like a cab IR or anything. Obviously, these things didn't load IR. You're not loading your own IR onto a 𝐬𝐿 G. I don't even think there's a USB port. But, you know, there's like some sort of cabinet EQ curve happening with the preamp sound. So, up to you how you want to run it, I guess. Now, the output on this is an actual headphone output. So that leads me to believe that these things probably weren't meant to be used really as like multi-effects unit, even though they are. And even though I am using it as a multi-effects unit, I think they were more meant to compete with something like the Rockman. I'm just telling you things. I don't know if these things matter. We're mostly just having fun here, right? And there's a ton more options with this pedal too. Like we can go to the drive here and we can scroll through these different drive types. And we can actually also control the gain as well, so. We have, you know, compressors, we have, there's a drum machine built into this as well. If you want to be obnoxious. There is, you know, there's all sorts of stuff. We have our EQ here, same effects, but more control over the parameters of those effects. Let's go to a different patch here. I think the effects sound better on the 𝐬𝐿, if I'm being honest with you. Despite it being smaller and not really a multi-effects, like it feels more like it's meant to be a personal practice amp with headphones. I think the effects are actually better in this one. I know, I'm making a stank face right now. It's not because it's like stanky tones, it's because it's just kind of shitty. We actually have this amp sim on here, I believe. Let's turn that off. I mean, okay, it sounds better that way. Now, I do feel really awkward plugging from something that says headphone out into the front of an amplifier, but I mean, these multi-effects units were designed to be ran in front of an amplifier, more or less. I prefer them into the power amp and cabinet, that's just me, but you let me know what you think down in the comments. I think that This is better than the DoD, but it's still really not good. It's still just really sad. Let's go through some of these other effects here and see. It's a little bit better. I don't try dialing it in a little bit, maybe. I prefer this a lot to the DoD that we just did through the preamp of this, but I still don't prefer it to just the amp. I mean, again, just for context here, this is just the lead channel on the amp. Yeah, kind of crazy in contrast. Let's go back to the pedal again. Back to the pedal. It just sounds like a very small thing coming through an amplifier, and the amplifier does help it versus the pedal running into a power amp pedal not sound so small. Like it helped, but it sounds like, it's kind of like when AI tries to draw hands. You know what I mean? Like that's what it feels like. It feels like the amp is trying to make the pedal big, but it's like doing it in an artificial way that just doesn't sound right. But let's just, for your ear holes and my own sanity, move on to the next thing, yeah? Yeah. This is the Pod Bean. A lot of you are probably familiar with this thing. This was the first digital modeler multi-effects unit that I ever used. I recorded an album with this in 2000, I think. And I remember at the time thinking like, that's lame. Like I want to use a real amplifier and stuff. But when we A/B'd this with the amplifier, this actually cut through the mix so much. And at that time, it's kind of hard to put this into perspective, but these things were starting to pop up and be used on albums regularly. And it really did lead to a massive breakthrough in guitar tone because it was so easy. You didn't have to rely on the engineer's skill to get a good guitar tone. This was just providing it for you, if that makes sense. And I view Line 6 and the Pod as sort of the catalyst for changing a lot of the guitar industry and the way we think about guitar tones and processing it. And the interesting thing is back then before this, there was never really that argument like, oh, digital versus modeler. Like there were some things that were like the ADA preamp and stuff like that, and maybe there were just very small pockets of guitar players like whatever. There wasn't really this argument of digital versus analog, which one is better, until the Pod came around and everyone started using one of these things. And then all of a sudden it became like, ugh, that doesn't sound like a real amp. You know, and we started having these endless arguments that still persist to this day. But this thing, by comparison to those older multi-effects units, sounds so much better. It's such a huge leap forward. You actually had control over a bunch of different parameters, you have a bunch of different effects in here, but you have actual preamp emulation of amplifiers and cabinet emulation as well. I'm obviously not using the cabinet emulation, which is cool that you can actually disable the cabinet emulation and just use the preamp emulation. It's pretty breakthrough at the time, right? And I know that you are hearing this through YouTube, through a mic'd up cabinet, and I just have to explain to you what I'm hearing in the room. Even with those multi-effects units plugged into like an actual cabinet and moving air in the room, they just sound so flat and small. Bumping the high, it's a bad frequency. When you're bumping the mids, they just sound hollow and empty. Like it's just, there's no dialing them in really. You kind of just get what you get with them. Whereas with something like this, it actually sounds somewhat like a real amplifier. And when we talk about Line 6 and pioneering amp modeling in the mainstream, they have come a long way since then. Like the newer stuff sounds, especially like the Axe effects and Quad Cortex, you know, the Helix, all these things sound much better than this. But incrementally, they made improvements over time, But the leap from those multi-effects units to this, it was just such a big deal. And what I'm trying to illustrate here is how this was such a big move forward for guitar players. And this, to me, is when guitar players started really getting, it's like, wow, you guys are lucky these days because you can buy this and have everything in there versus not too long before this, you either had to have one of those little multi-effects units that didn't sound very good or invest in a bunch of pedals and amplifiers, rack gear maybe. You know, those were kind of like the avenues. There just weren't as many options, and there weren't as many options that actually sounded like a thing you would actually want to play. Let's go to a clean channel, why not, right? We're here, we might as well. There's like combinations of effects. Let's do the delay and the compressor. And then we can control the reverb independently. You can also tweak the effects right here if you want. It's really cool. It just presented a lot of new and unique options and got it into the hands of guitar players, you know, at a pretty reasonable price, if I remember correctly. I don't remember what they cost when they came out. I'll put it on screen right now. And going back to that first album that my band recorded with this thing, I mean, I think most of the reason we ended up recording with this is because the engineer that was recording us had just got one and he just wanted to use it. Because we ended up changing a bunch of parts based off the effects that were in here, just because of the inspiration, I guess, from using this thing and starting and dialing in with it. It's almost like TVs. You know, buying a big screen TV back in the early 2000s, they were very expensive. Most people did not have big screen TVs, and now, you know, you get a 65-inch TV for like less than $1,000. It's just crazy. It's crazy how much technology has changed, how much the access to technology has changed. Hopefully you guys had a good time going on this nostalgia journey with me. All right, shout out to 𝗏𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿 for sponsoring this video, but more importantly, shout out to you for being here with me. I really appreciate it. If you like this video, make sure to hit the like button, consider subscribing. If you really like the stuff I do, consider joining these people over here on Patreon and being super overpowered. And I will see you in the next video. Bye guys.